Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'll just wait a minute or so for people in the audience to come through the waiting room and so on, and then we'll move on to this panel.
Pues nada, vamos a hacer eso. Hablo yo en lo que habla el...
Okay, I'll wait one more minute, I think, and then we can make a start. Okay, right. It's 3 minutes past 4 in London, and welcome everyone who's joined us for this global webinar. As you know, this is the third series of these global webinars, and this is the fourth one of this particular series. I'm really pleased that we got such a wonderful lineup of speakers and themes to explore in regard to the US, China, and Latin America. So Juvaria will introduce the speakers in a moment and the broad theme, and but I just want to say a few words about this global webinar series, what it's for, what are we trying to do. And I think in the end, the idea behind it is quite simple. We all felt that there are big world issues being discussed from very, very narrow perspectives and backgrounds, and it would just help everyone get a better idea, factually, empirically, but also theoretically and in terms of broader perspectives, if we were to have a far broader, wider range of speakers who would be able to contribute to the discussion. So that is what we've been trying to do overall. It's a bit of a struggle always, trying to get speakers from different parts of the world sitting in one room, well, in several different rooms, but united by Zoom on a weekly basis. But we've managed to do that this week. And I think the value of it is that people have different experiences, different ideas, different theories. They use different methods of study. They often are in different occupations who are analyzing what is happening in the world. People are in the media as commentators and so on. Many of us are scholars, but there are other people who have worked in diplomacy or in think tanks and in different disciplines also. So all of those have interesting things to say. And one of the most interesting ways in my experience and others as well to learn is to sort of listen to what different people, how they come to a particular issue, how they tackle it, what perspectives they bring, and what background experiences they bring as well. And the fact that people are in different global locations also has a big impact. So one of the movements that was inspiring to us in setting up the global webinars were two things. One is the kind of general kind of drift towards global history or global IR, and the whole idea that there is a big world out there, which generally whose voices we rarely ever hear. And I think that was one of the key things. And allied to that was this broader decolonization movement as well, which is to say that the circuits of knowledge are so well established and so hardwired that very often in the global north, we talk to one another only. We go to the same conferences, we publish in very similar kind of journals, we teach curricula which are very similar or on a fairly narrowly construed, but it would enrich the conversation if we could actually bring out into the open people from other parts of the world, but also people who are more critical of that particular configuration of knowledge and so on. So that were the kind of basic ideas, and that's what we're trying to do through this series and including today. So with that, I'll stop and I'll hand over to my co-host, Juvaria, to introduce our speakers for today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Inderjeet. So today's topic is China and the US in Latin America. Broadly, we're going to be talking about how China's global influence has been growing consistently over the last decade, and it represents one of the most significant changes in the international system of power since the end of the Cold War. It's also one of the most rapid transformations the world has ever experienced. So the shifting needs and imperatives of this new global power have driven an unprecedented expansion of new commercial and political relations with the global South, including Latin America. So as a result, today, China competes with the United States in the formation of political and economic relationships with Latin America. And to discuss the implications of these relationships in this session, we've gathered together an exciting panel of speakers who I will now introduce. So we have with us Professor Raul Rodriguez. He's the director of the Center for Hemispheric and United States Studies at the University of Havana. Professor Rodriguez holds a BA degree in English from the Higher Institute of Foreign Languages, an MA degree in 20th Century History and International Relations, and a PhD in History from the School of History and Social Sciences from the University of Havana. He's a member of the Working Group on US Studies at the Latin American Council on Social Sciences, and his main research interests are US-Cuba relations and US-Latin America relations, with an emphasis on US economic sanctions as a form of economic coercion in the Western Hemisphere. We also have with us Dr. Filipe Mendonça, who's a researcher at the Brazilian Institute for Studies on the United States. He is also an international political economy professor at the Federal University of Uberlândia. He is the author, along with Tulo Vigavani and Thiago Lima, of a book called Power and Trade, the US Trade Policy, which was published in 2018. We also have with us Dr. Olga Rosa González, who is a deputy director of the Center for Hemispheric and US Studies at the University of Havana. She's also a professor at the School of Communication and the School of Foreign Languages at the same university. Her research expertise is in political communication, strategic communication, and media law, among other topics. She's also been a panelist at many different national and international academic events, and her articles have been published in Cuba and abroad. She's also a prolific translator. Dr. González is a graduate of the School of Foreign Languages of the University of Havana and has a master's and a PhD degree in communication sciences. And we also have with us Professor Min Yi, who is Associate Professor of International Relations at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. Professor Yi's areas of expertise include Chinese political economy, China and India comparisons, East Asian international relations and globalization with a focus on transnational immigration and foreign investment. Her publications include The Belt and Road and Beyond, State Mobilized Globalization in China, 1998 to 2018. This was published in 2020. Another book, Diasporas and Foreign Direct Investment in China and India, was published in 2014, and The Making of Northeast Asia was published in 2010. Thank you all for joining us today.
Great, thank you very much. And Raul, it's all over to you. Thank you. Raul, you can start.
So, yes. Is that okay?
Yeah, please do. Please start.
Okay. First of all, I thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in this webinar. We have been, I personally have been involved and participate as participant in previous webinars, which I find very enlightening and very interesting. I think that the effort that Inderjeet and Juvaria have been doing for this whole year is very commendable. The idea of bringing different voices from different places, and it's very important for all academic discussion and all academic. It's very enriching. So I'm happy to participate. My presentation, the title maybe looks a bit like two things that are very far apart. I entitled it Alternative Regionalism, Competing Models, and US-China Look at Latin America. There's no time here to enter into the a theoretical discussion of regionalism or definitions of that. That'll take the whole 15 minutes. So basically, what I would to set the time where we are, in my view, in Latin America right now, in terms of regionalism, with some ideas about that. The region has gone through different waves of regionalism and has been associated, the first one with structuralist, neoliberal, and post-neoliberal moments in the development of this region. Recently, by the political pendulum. For example, in the 1990s, at the beginning or at the end of the so-called Cold War as the order of international relations, we have a big drive towards neoliberal regionalism with strong stress in economic integration, which was led by the United States and Canada. It's very interesting that Canada at that time, talking about early 1990s, sees as the region of Latin America or the Western Hemisphere as the only region where they really can diversify its international relations, as the United Kingdom moves more towards Europe, and Canada sees that the only real area to come into a regional economic pact is the Western Hemisphere. This regional integration project was basically a neoliberal. It's an extension of what the United States already was able to craft out with Canada and Mexico. The then called NAFTA, now it's something else. And it's basically was intellectually to some extent also based on the whole idea of the Western Hemisphere, in my view, a Monroeist kind of idea that the Western Hemisphere has a unity, and that unity at the moment in the early 1990s when it was promoted was basically the support of how this so-called free trade area of the Americas would have to work. It was based on the Washington Consensus, and that essentially failed in the mid 1990s. It failed in the mid 1990s, and it was substituted by some sort of hub and spoke kind of free trade agreements, bilateral, and with the United States and Chile, for example, the United States and Colombia, so on and so forth. Now, at the end of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 21st century, we start seeing what some scholars, some have been calling alternative regionalism, which is a new wave of regionalism that we could call it counter-hegemonic, post-neoliberal, or counter-imperialist in many ways, an alternative to the regionalism proposed by or led by the United States and the Western Hemisphere. Let's be clear that we're talking about the Western Hemisphere, that is, from Canada to Argentina, which, as we know, has been since declared by the United States since 1823, with the exception of Canada, its sphere of influence, and that was what drove this whole 1990s free trade of the Americas. Now, the alternative regionalism, as we see it, the centerpiece of that was, or it still is, what is known as ALBA. ALBA is a Bolivarian alternative for Latin America, and it's also called ALBA TCP, Treaty of Commerce of the Peoples. This treaty tries to go beyond a mere integration of markets and has a social component and some idea of complementary relationships. It was led specifically by Cuba and Venezuela, and the core of this was Venezuelan resources with Cuban capital. That was the basic core of that, which expanded in the early part of the 21st century to the other countries, to the number of 8 countries who were members of this ALBA. It does have an economic component, but also has a strong social component with social programs, medical programs, educational programs. And even today now, one interesting thing that for us that we've been involved in this kind of webinar, ALBA today has an international yearly conference of think tanks, of countries of the ALBA who are trying to get together and academically define and promote this sort of alternative regionalism and counter-hegemonic foreign policy in a way. The intellectual ideas behind this ALBA come from the idea of our America. Our America, as defined by Jose Marti, and our America and the Bolivarian idea of America. This is also, again, those things are what I'm saying, have debates and positions on the academic world. I'm trying to just give you broad strokes of how this is perceived. In the past decade, ALBA fell victim of the swing of the political pendulum. What I'm saying is that we have countries like Ecuador, whose government shifted to the right and then dropped out of ALBA, and also the other elements of this, what we may call alternative regionalism, which it was called UNASUR, which was a concerted mechanism of South American countries, and CELAC, which is 33 countries except Canada and the United States. So we have the coup in Bolivia, and the government resulting of that coup also dropped out of ALBA. Now Bolivia is back in the ALBA mechanism again after last year the government was restored and led by the same political party that was leading before the coup. We have the case of Brazil, and I let Filipe talk about that. Bolsonaro, of course, rejected all that idea of this sort of different alternative or counter-hegemonic regionalism. We have Colombia, was still. So the whole impetus towards this kind of alternative regionalism lost steam, so to speak, in the middle of the past decade. We're not going to talk about scenarios, but there may be a scenario in this decade where this is recomposed, as also Colombia, Chile, and Brazil will have elections, which may lead to different kinds of governments. But that's another thing that we don't going to enter into. Now, where in this moment, that's where we are. Now, where does China and the United States meet here? It's obvious that there's a lot of literature already written about China and the United States, the Chinese rivalry with the United States. It's become a paradigm in international relations debates because of the real political and economic dynamics that all this implies. There are two of the biggest economies, the two biggest economies in the world today. If I'm going too fast, you let me know, but I'm trying to cover a lot in a short time. There are competing over power and status, but in the case of the Western Hemisphere, there are things that I like to point out, how we see from Cuba this competition between China and the United States. Now, there are two visions of China's involvement in Latin America. Again, there's a debate about that. One side or one group of scholars see China's growing interest in Latin America in infrastructure, financing, as a relation of mutual benefit, because, and also the Chinese government, this is sort of approves this kind of view. It's a relation that is based. Let me see a couple of my notes here. You can frame it in a South-South non-involvement in international affairs. China, for some people who defend this idea, present an alternative development model, not the development of dependent development that we've seen in Latin America over the last few decades. And for some of the people who subscribe this tendency or view, there's an absence of conditionalities when it comes to loans and trade. In the particular case of saying that China promotes an alternative to the Bretton Woods system, not condition its loans or its investment to geopolitical considerations. But there are others who say that China's stress on mining and the export of raw materials and the fact and the asymmetry between the Chinese economy and the countries in Latin America also reproduces the same kind of relationship that China had with the United States from that point of view. So there's a debate on that. In the particular case of Cuba, because of the strained relation we have with the United States, China is a more viable alternative. Because it's obvious with the United States, we have a system of sanctions, we have a huge political conflict, and China comes as a country that offers investments without conditionality. Because also in terms of conditionality, some of the people who disapprove of this Chinese intervention, not intervention, but relation with Latin America, said there's some conditionality because China imposes the condition to recognize China over Taiwan, the mainland over Taiwan, as a condition for improved economic ties. But that's not a problem for Cuba, right? So specific for countries, this is a different relation. Now, if we were to compare China and the United States in Latin America, we also have to say that Chinese involvement in Latin America, again, in broad strokes, is basically geo-economic. And it is not linked to ideological paradigms. China has investments in Cuba and Venezuela, is trying is very much involved in building a new canal in Central America through Nicaragua, which are countries that have a left-oriented and counter-hegemonic foreign policy in many ways. But at the same time, has free trade agreements with Costa Rica, with Peru, and is the main trading partner of Brazil. I don't know if that's correct, Filipe, but almost. But with Argentina. So the Chinese involvement is more geo-economic, although of course geo-economic could eventually lead to more geopolitical interest. But at present, it's more based on geo-economic, and it's not constrained by political and ideological ideas that would lead. Again, it has investment and all over the region. Now, the case of the United States, it's totally different in that sense. The involvement in Latin America dates back, as I said earlier, since the early 19th century. It's built on this idea of the Western Hemisphere. The United States has built over many years this hegemonic domain and a sphere of influence in Latin America and the Caribbean. And although there are now economically facing the competition of China in many ways in infrastructure and in exports, but there are other elements in U.S. presence in Latin America that, in my view, still give the United States some advantages as compared to China, which is Monroeism is alive and well in Latin America. China is perceived and is projected as that extra-continental actor that is bringing a different system. Now this administration, is now in the United States is looking or is talking about autocracies, which is a big debate now. Now it's not although this whole idea that the United States and China are in this Thucydides trap that eventually will go to war, or that there's a new Cold War between China and the United States, that is not reflected in Latin America in many ways, because still the United States has the military prevalence in the region. Most of Latin American countries buy weapons from the United States, and their military is trained on the US doctrine. So that's strategically for the United States is an advantage in this rivalry with China. And also this very important idea, and Olga is going to refer to that, I'm sure, of culture, media, and education. The whole of Latin America and the Caribbean is in many ways is Western, so to speak. So there's a difference in that sense. The United States has still its prevalence in Latin America in pop culture, in movies, you can watch CGTV in Brazil or Argentina, but you can watch like 110 American channels in Latin America, and you can have a Confucius Institute in Latin America, but you have hundreds of institutes and think tanks and in Latin America that are connected with the United States production of knowledge and the elite reproduction of the same values and the same ideas. So that's the point in which I wanted to frame the rivalry between the China and the United States. Also, the elites in Latin America look to the United States as a model, for how their societies should be organized. And there's a whole system built over the years, stemming from the Monroe idea, which is the inter-American system. So China has nothing compared to that. Again, although economically and geoeconomically, this whole Belt and Road that I'm sure is going to be more thoroughly examined here, the trade and all the aspects. And that's why I was happy to go first, because my presentation is basically a broad presentation that sets the framework for my other colleagues, which I'm looking forward to listening to. But China has, this Belt and Road has 18 countries already signing in. Cuba is part of them in the energy sector of the Belt and Road. And the United States answer to this has been this whole idea of build back better world, which is basically have to seek the private sector to engage in other areas of Latin America. So in terms of economy or geoeconomic projection, China might have made some inroads, but still the Western Hemisphere is very much the sphere of influence of the United States, and the counter-hegemonic processes, which may have, we see some recomposition in this next decade, are still working. And for those projects, of course, Chinese relationship is much better in terms of not demanding subordination and not demanding conditionality to the extent that the United States does. So I probably think that I used my 15 minutes, and I will then give up to the next speaker. Well, you can set up the Olga with her presentation. So
yeah, before Olga sets up, just a few minutes for Q&A, and so thank you very much, Raul, for that talk. Lots of interesting points made there, and I'd like to ask some questions, but I'd also want the audience to use the Q&A function, please, and type in your questions there, and we can kind of relate those to the speaker as well. And of course, if Filipe or Minyi or Olga or Juvaria want to ask any questions, please just raise your hand or something and unmute and go. So it's a free-for-all, fairly informal here. So any questions, but just to quick kick it off, I'm really interested in ALBA, and particularly in the point you made about the kind of think tank conferences which are going on underneath state-to-state relations. And so, but you said that ALBA is a little bit unstable because of the elections and shift to the right in some states and then a shift back and so on. Do think tank relations among ALBA states also, are they as unstable, or do they carry on regardless of the change of government?
Well, this it's a fairly new move in this sort of renewal. The new ALBA Secretary General is from Bolivia. When Bolivia joined back, there started this sort of fora. Also, they're what they sell when they talk about the Tratado de Comercio con los Pueblos, which is Commerce Treaty of the Peoples. There are also civil society meetings of ALBA countries, and there are other meetings that have continued on. But this think tank is fairly new. It started last year, and hopefully it followed what you said, that goes on beyond any other. There are other consultation mechanisms of the civil society, the Sao Paulo Fora, and many other, but still the idea of bringing together think tanks from ALBA countries and Latin American countries under this is a very significant move, and we'll have to watch and see how this unfolds.
Could you say something about, because quite frankly, I don't think ALBA is not very well known among the general public, certainly, and even amongst a lot of scholars, and certainly I've only found out about it relatively recently and by accident. And now, could you perhaps tell us a little bit more about you know, if you were to compare, not even necessarily compare ALBA with Mercosur or anything else, what are the kind of economic dimensions, the commercial, financial, people to people? How big is it, you know, in terms of what it actually does?
Well, yeah. Again, ALBA has also political mechanisms, many political mechanisms, and society to society mechanisms. Which Mercosur, for example, Mercosur is modeled after the European Union, which obviously we have to see that it's the most successful integration mechanism in the world today, the European Union. There's no question about that. So Mercosur in many ways is modeled after the European Union. It is limited to economic relations, to mobility of people within the market. It's like a common market of South American countries. So it really lacks the political, social dimensions that ALBA has, and that's what makes it different. ALBA also encourages economic relations, but again, the principle that I think it's important is the fact of complementarity, which is a country that is strong in one area. For example, what Cuba provides more to ALBA is human capital. You see Cuban doctors, you see program of education. There's this one thing under the ALBA umbrella that was called Miracle Operation, which was a very movement to operate on people who had cataracts. And the hospitals were built, and people from Bolivia, from Ecuador, from many countries were able to come and regain their eyesight through a mechanism with Cuban doctors and the resources of some of these countries in that sense. So that's what ALBA brings. And the reason, unfortunately, that is not well known is about who owns the media, who owns the debates of that, and that's one of the main reasons it's not well known. We have to acknowledge that it was something that it was quite new, and to some extent it lost a lot. Even member countries shifted to the right, and so and then dropped out of that. We again, I'm not saying that whatever would happen in Latin America is going to be the same. Of course, for example, Brazil with Lula was not a member of ALBA, but it was something that would favor this sort of integration. Argentina is not a member of ALBA, even though now they have a more center-left country. So it's a heterogeneous movement, but it's more countries or government that are more to the left, so to speak, in that sense.
So I can see that the United States would be hostile to such a regional organization. What's the attitude of China to
well,
it?
Basically, what I said earlier, the attitude of China is that China's objectives and interests are mostly geo-economic. So China has investments in Cuba. I mean, China is Cuba's not largest trading partner in number because of the oil trade with Venezuela, but in terms of diversification, if you say a rough number of trade, China and Venezuela and Cuba, Venezuela is number one. But in terms of diversification of areas, China will be number one.
Right.
And then the same thing with Venezuela, the same thing with, at the same time, Peru, which now has a more left of center government, if we could put it that way, is China's the main trading partner of Peru, and it has strong interest in Brazil and in Colombia. I mean, if you look at, say, for example, 2 or 3 of the countries that are more led by right-wing governments today, Brazil, Colombia, and Chile, they have a strong economic relationship with China.
Yeah.
So it's more pragmatic, less ideological, and more based on geoeconomic interests, which eventually may lead to more geopolitical. But at this moment, it's more pragmatic.
Yeah, but given the fact that the United States and other states as well are sanctioning Cuba in a variety of ways and for a long, long time, the fact that China is continuing freely to supply goods, services, and so on, and capital, does that not create the conditions for geopolitical and military conflict?
Well, it may be because the United States sees that that Chinese involvement as having eventually will have a component which would have more geopolitical influence. But to your point, it is the United States who has the system of sanctions on Cuba. No other countries have sanctions on Cuba. The problem is that the United States sanctions are extraterritorial. And since the United States dominate the world financial system, basically this extend to even Chinese companies are affected in their trade with Cuba because there are strong links with US companies.
Yeah. Right. I've just one more question, actually. You said that there's a debate in Cuba, perhaps, between those who see China as kind of new kind of actor with different ideas and geoeconomic, more pragmatic, and those who see that China possibly is potentially just another imperial or neo-colonial power. So when you say there's a debate, is that a scholarly debate, or is it a political debate, or is it something which is dividing the government?
Well, not in the case of Cuba. It's all over. It's scholarly debate, and it's some countries that see China as a new paradigm of relationship, South-South cooperation, new sort of development, no conditionality, which again for Cuba is very important because it's the United States and many other countries put other kinds of conditions, but but others see this as China is just replicating. It's similar, and what we see between the United States and China is an intercapitalist kind of competition because China also promotes extractivism, mining. China also puts some conditions because of the recognition of Taiwan. So the debate is not only scholarly, it's for example, Panama had to recognize China over Taiwan to get more Chinese investment.
Okay.
So again, it's political and it's both an academic.
All right, thank you, Raul. There's a load of questions that we could carry on. I could carry on asking.
You know we'll have this exchange and more.
Yeah, but we'll have more. We'll definitely have more. Okay. Thank you so much for your talk. Really wonderful. There's a question on the Q&A.
I'm going to let Olga sit in this chair so she can set up her presentation and work with the. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we're going to, while Olga sets herself up to speak, we're going to move over to Filipe Mendonça, who's going to give his presentation now. Thank you, Filipe.
Right. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My talk today is gonna be called Crisis and Reconfiguration, the Impact of Sino-US Tensions on South America. It is good to talk after Raul because he made my life easier. But right now I'll try to think a little bit about South America and how it deals with all this. And to do so, I intend to address three different questions, but three different ideas, but complementary ideas. The first one is about the international liberal order crisis, which of course has its impacts in Latin America. The second one is about the South American puzzle, which has been trying to adjust its foreign policy to this new power reality in the international system. And the third idea is that I'll try to talk a little bit today is about Brazil, where I am right now, or about how Brazilian politics has felt these Sino-US tensions in its own political and economic systems, and how the President Bolsonaro represents a great disconnection, a huge disconnection of how the game has been played in the region. So those are the main topics of my talk today, starting with the international level, after that, the regional level, and after that, the local level. Well, so let's start from the beginning. Let's start from the international level. As you all know, there is a crisis as we speak in the liberal international order. At its core, the international order crisis is a consequence of the current limitations faced by the United States to reproduce its hegemony globally through international institutions. As the chief architect of the liberal order, the United States has not been able to eliminate its points of tensions. Instead, in the last years, the United States have in some sense departed from its own liberal order, criticizing the multilateral institutions, abandoning historical alliances, and so on. I wrote with Professor Leonardo Ramos a small text about it called The Perfect Storm, the International Liberal Order and the Biden Administration. You guys gently published it on the International System of Power blog. We call the current US crisis as the perfect storms because of the combination of the current international liberal order crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Of course, this crisis at the international liberal order was a lot more clear at the Trump administration, but it is still going on at the Biden administration, even though Biden administration is trying to change this a little bit. I think it's not impossible for the US to change this course at South America. However, it's a difficult job for many reasons. There are three big limitations, in my point of view, that make the Biden's job more difficult. The first one is, of course, the domestic crisis and the contradictions between domestic and international priorities to Biden administration. The second limitation is the current state of US relation with historical partners. And the third limitation is the increasing tensions between United States and China relations, as we are going to talk a little bit more right now. So there are limitations, even though the Biden administration is trying to put the United States at the center of the world again. Important attempts to recover multilateralism are underway. One important initiative Raul just talked about, the B3W initiative, clearly developed to contain the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. On the other hand, the Biden administration has been facing difficulties to approve its economic programs at home and facing criticism inside the Democratic Party itself. So it's a complicated world, and there is a lot going on at the international level. This discussion is very important, as every one of you know, and it has many points of views. So my job here is to try to show how these tensions in the international system, or how this crisis, which has two big partners or two big players, has been felt in South America. And this is what I'm trying to do. I'll try to do right now. So the second part of my talk is about the regional puzzle, the South American puzzle. The Sino-US tensions has its impact in Latin America in many ways, depending on where you are in the region, and it's going on for at least 2 decades. Over the last 20 years, many researchers have begun to analyze the implications, the meaning of the Chinese rapid entry into Latin America countries, and of course, the US reaction to it. Washington has expressed concerns about the rising Chinese presence in Latin America, a region traditionally considered by the US government as a natural theater of US influence. So this is a huge debate. It's going on everywhere in Brazil as well, at the academic level, at the government level. Everyone, more or less, are debating what does it mean, what does the Chinese rise in the region means, and what the opportunities we have in this facing this new reality. On the other hand, particular aspects of China's economic ties in Latin America, especially in South America, including highly asymmetrical trade relations and massive lending by Chinese policy banks, has provoked a full spectrum of political and economic policy reactions in practically every country in the region. But in my point of view, it's important to give a step back. Raul talked a little bit about it, but it's important to mention that in South America, the period from 2000 to 2020 can be broken down into two main cycles or two main waves. From 2000 to 2014 or 2015, there was a rise to power of progressive governments in the region and the adoption of new developmentalist policies or state-led policies that were financed by commodity sales to China. It is commonly referred by the literature as the pink wave. During this pink wave period, it's called pink wave because the leftist parties and candidates gained power and momentum, like in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Uruguay, in Bolivia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, and so on. These governments promoted several regional integration initiatives that Raul was talking about it right now, over and beyond bilateral trade agreements, sought to deepen political, economic, and cultural ties within the region. The main example here in South America was UNASUR, as Raul just talked about it, and we will try to talk a little bit later. Anyway, this period overlapped with China's launching of its own going out strategy designed to promote trade and oversee Chinese direct investments. China's huge demand for primary commodities readily met up with South Americans' abundant supply of oil, copper, iron, soybean, and so on. Together, this created what the Economic Commission of Latin America and Caribbean called an unusual margin of autonomy for the economies of South America, where commodity money were so flush that those countries could quickly rebound from the global financial crisis of 2008, for example. But this pink wave, as many authors have called it, has ended. The second period, from 2014 to 2020, marked the end of the commodity price boom, marked a realignment in the regional integration priorities and the emergence of center-right governments in South America. In Brazil, for example, Dilma Rousseff was replaced by Michel Temer, and after that, by Jair Messias Bolsonaro. In Chile, Michelle Bachelet was replaced by Sebastián Piñera. In Colombia, Juan Santos was replaced by Ivan Duque. In Paraguay, Fernando Luco was replaced by Horacio Cartes and Mario Abdo Benítez right now. So there are variations of this trend. In Argentina, for example, Cristina Kirchner was replaced by Macri. Macri was defeated after that by Alberto Fernandez in 2019. But last Sunday, for example, Argentina's went to polls in midterm parliamentary update, and the result right now indicates a defeat of the government of President Alberto Fernandez to center-right parties. In Venezuela, of course, is another variation of this trend. In South America, the severe Venezuelan crisis is an example of how any earlier sub-regional appeal for Hugo Chávez's socialist agenda has lost ground in the region. Nicolás Maduro faces severe criticism in the region as well, but Maduro has an important partner. In a recent speech, Maduro said that China and Venezuela are more united than ever. So China is an important partner for Venezuela as well. So this second wave has many characteristics that I would like to point out. 4 of them are very important. The first one, this second wave is marked by commodities crisis, which led to many severe economic and social crises in South America. The second wave is marked by the crisis of autonomous regional integration projects. How was talking about this right now. So it's a kind of end of that counter-hegemonic regionalism that Raul was talking about right now. The third mark of the second wave is what we can call a very questionable government successions. That's not a good way to call it, but we can talk a little bit about it later. So in Brazil, for example, there were impeachment of Dilma Rousseff that led to Jair Bolsonaro after that. And this second wave, this conservative wave, it is also marked by a closer relationship with the United States and an attempt to contain the Chinese presence in the region. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about every one of these marks, of these characteristics of this far right wave. I don't know how to call it. Some people call it a conservative wave, a right wave, a far right wave. So this is going on in South America right now. But I have some minutes left. I'll talk a little bit about the Brazilian case, what's going on in Brazil. I've been researching with Leonardo Ramos, with Alexandre Leite about this Sino-US tension in Brazil. And our last researches have shown that there is a great disconnection between material and ideological aspects of the Brazilian foreign policy under Bolsonaro's government concerning the Brazilian relationship with China and the United States. The debate is huge, as Raul was talking about. Some in the academic field, some colleagues think China presence in Brazil could be understood as a South-to-South relation, and some colleagues think it's a new kind of dependency or a new kind of imperialism. Different, but a new kind of dependency. Anyway, this is a huge debate, but from a material point of view, Brazil has strengthened its economic ties with China. I have some data here about trade balance, Brazilian trade balance, and Brazilian confirmed foreign direct investment by country. And it is obvious that China is growing fast in Brazil. It's already the most important Brazilian partner in the economic field. Nevertheless, ideologically, Bolsonaro's government seeks a close relationship with the United States, copying and sustaining US position mainly during Trump's administration, but still today, even though Trump is not more at power, Bolsonaro keeps talking about what Trump means to the region. So Jair Bolsonaro's victory in 2018 elections was not an isolated event. In addition to being part of a conservative wave in South America, it represented the victory of a far-right neoliberal nationalism ideology, replacing the position raised by Donald Trump, replicating the position raised by Donald Trump. In line with this ideological position, seeking an agenda integrated with the interest of the Trump government in the US, Bolsonaro and his staff opposed Brazil to international liberal order principles, as well as disregarded China's economic relevance, encouraging a xenophobic discourse. Despite the Chinese relevance in trade and investment flows, the statements that Bolsonaro government needs to do were wrong in our point of view in their material essence, as the data shows us. Some actors in Brazilian politics were forced to step in to reduce the damage created by Bolsonaro's statements, especially when we look at the Chinese relation, Brazil-Chinese relation. But the damage is huge, and Bolsonaro cannot be stopped. He used many terms that like China virus and Comuna virus, referring to the wrong idea of blaming China for the pandemic. Anyway, so domestically, Bolsonaro has high rejection rates, a country with serious, finds right now a country with serious economic problems, including the return of inflation and serious social problems such as rising poverty, misery in Brazil, and Brazil unfortunately returned to world map of hunger. And at least in the short and middle terms, a serious confrontation of such problems implies necessarily good relations with China, unfortunately for Bolsonaro's ideological and outright foreign policy. So to finish my talk, the present puzzle, the present regional puzzle, calls up for three main research questions that we are trying to understand right now. The first one is, to what extent does China represent a threat to long-standing US hegemony in the South America? Empirically, the US still dominates by a small margin trade and investment flows in South America, but the China's role in South American security matters remains at a relatively low level. So the question remains, what does it mean and what Washington is willing to do to stop Chinese rise in the region? The second question is, how is this shaping intra-regional and international politics in South America? Or in what ways have the various sub-regional blocs just mentioned by Raul enable the South American countries to cope with rising Sino-US tensions, as well as the intense economic competition that China's entry into South America has introduced? And the last question is about Brazil. As the largest country of the region, what is the Brazilian role in this puzzle? In 2022, Brazilians will vote again. Currently, the dispute is between Bolsonaro, one of the biggest names of that conservative wave that we were talking about, against Lula, one of the biggest representatives of that pink wave that we were talking about. So therefore, everything indicates that the result of the Brazilian elections in 2022 will explain a lot what's going on inside Brazil, but we will also say a lot about the future of the South American politics. So that's what I prepared for this first part. Thank you very much. I'm willing to hear from you guys about these ideas.
Great, Filipe, thank you so much. That was such an interesting and sort of wide-ranging, but also you managed to focus in on some core ideas and themes as well. And again, I remind the audience, please put up your questions. I know there's one which I'm waiting to use for perhaps after Minye's talk, which I'll talk about, raise later on. But Filipe, you mentioned that if we just start with the last point that you made, you said that Brazil's having elections. So there's two things. One is, where do you think Brazil is heading in terms of the election outcome? And two, do you think, as the largest economy, the largest country in the region, do you think that that would send a signal to the rest of the region about a sort of major shift which may be underway towards returning to something other than the far right or the conservative wave?
Yes, those are very good questions. About the outcome, it's a difficult question to answer. I would like to tell you guys that I was wrong in all my predictions before. So I might be wrong again, but right now Lula is the preferred candidate for majority of Brazilians. So if the election were today, Lula would win, and this is what the data shows us, the polls and everything. But everything can happen from now to then. Not very long ago, Bolsonaro was questioning, as Trump did in the United States, questioning our electoral system. and nothing stops him to do it again. And what we are very concerned about is that the military are very strong inside the government. Right now, Bolsonaro stopped to question the electoral system, but as I told you, nothing stops him to start questioning again. So we are not sure if Bolsonaro will respect the result of the election, especially if he loses for Lula. So even if Lula wins, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. We are not sure if Lula's victory would be strong enough to organize those social tensions that are going on in Brazil. Our elites do not want Lula to come back, but they know that Bolsonaro is a huge mistake. So this is the main problem we are facing. So there are colleagues, there are friends of people that study this that are more optimistic. They think that Lula will win, he can win, and Brazil is going to go back as a regional power. But some friends do not believe that. Some friends of mine think Lula could be killed, for example, just for you to understand the gravity of the situation. But to answer directly your question, right now Lula would win. And he's working hard to do it. Right now, he is at Europe in a major tour that it's something that never happened. A candidate has a stronger diplomacy than the president elected. The second question about what it means to the region, a possible Lula's victory, this is also an open question. But I think we can say that Lula would give Lula's victory would be a major signal to the region. If you give a step back, Argentina, when Alberto Fernandez was elected, started this process here in South America. Because Macri was defeated, and we used to say in Brazil that what happens at Argentina means a lot in Brazil, because we sometimes we like mirroring those trends in politics and economy. So I think it's going to be a huge sign, and Lula is talking about it, how he wants to go back to Mercosur, how he understands UNASUR, that Bolsonaro he didn't have anything to say about our regional projects. So if Lula wins, I think it could be maybe the end of one of the main points of the end of that what we are calling right now the conservative wave here in South America.
Thank you. Min-Yi, you have a contribution?
I would want to ask a question. So I wonder, Filipe, you can briefly address one. It's a surprise. I don't know. In Brazil, what is a how central is economic development debates among the elites and election, and Brazil had very good economic run earlier this century, and now it's behind most of the emerging markets. So what's the self-reflection, the debates going on among political, economic elites thinking about Brazil in the next phase? The second is how do the BRICS and this emerging markets alliance, right? So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, BRICS in the Chinese formulation, it's a central part of its regional strategy and pertaining to Latin America, in particular in Brazil. So how this BRICS formula feature in Brazil's discussion? Thanks.
those are two great questions as well. I'm sorry if I have not the right answers, but I have some ideas about it. So about the economic debates in our elites, this is a very nice question because it's going on right now. Every day at the newspapers, you read about it, and it's not a simple answer to give because the dilemma is that our elites do not want Lula elected anyway. They hate PT, which is the Partido dos Trabalhadores, Lula's party. There is something that we call antipetismo, which is a feeling that PT, that the Labor Party here in Brazil, could not come back to power in any way. So this is what is going on, and we are worried because if PT wins the election, we are not sure how the markets will react or how this elite will react. And Lula knows it, and he's working hard to try to manage this situation. Right now, what's going on is Lula is discussing within the Labor Party who is going to be his vice president. And the name of the vice president in the Lula's campaign will be central to give a strong message to Brazilian elite about how the new government would work. Right now, Geraldo Alckmin, which was a adversary of Lula in previous elections, is being ventilated by media as the vice president if Lula will be elected. Anyway, so in the other view, in the other point of view, our elites they are ashamed of Bolsonaro, but I'm pretty sure that if the election against Lula really goes as we are talking about, our elite will vote for Bolsonaro. Will do campaign for him. So this is what is going on, and media is doing a hard work to try to create a third campaign, a third name, to do not be able, so neither Lula, neither Bolsonaro, they are trying to launch another name, and the strongest third name right now is Moro. I don't know if you guys remember who Moro is. Moro was the judge that sent Lula to jail. So our third wave it's like Bolsonaro, but it's a Bolsonarism that our elite is not ashamed of. I don't know if this idea is clear. About BRICS, Bolsonaro has no foreign policy that makes any sense. It's a great disconnection of reality, and Bolsonaro has nothing to say about BRICS. Today, some colleagues here in Brazil talks about BRICS, or they brought out the B of the BRICS because Brazil has nothing to say about it. But that's not the case for Lula's campaign. He's saying that he wants to put Brazil back in the coalition, and Bolsonaro right now is more concerned about what's going on at the United States with Trump. He is more concerned about what's going on in Italy, Hungary. So he's completely disconnected from the real world, and it's a tragedy for our diplomacy. Brazilian diplomacy was well known for its professionalism, but with Bolsonaro, unfortunately, we know that our diplomacy has nothing to say about any important question in the world. But so that's not the case with Lula's campaign.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Filipe, for that, handling the Q&A and your presentation as well. And because of time constraints and each individual's schedules, I'm going to ask if it is okay with Olga that Minyi goes next, speaks now, because Minyi has a time constraint and has to leave in a reasonably hurried way. If that's okay with Olga.
Okay, no problem.
Is that okay? Thank you so much. So Minyi, please, can we hand over to you now?
Yes, Filipe, can you stop share? Thanks.
I'm trying. I'm sorry, but I don't know how to. Oh yeah, I think I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thanks to the organizers, Professor Parmar and Juvaria, for organizing this and for the invitation. And it's great to learn from colleagues in Latin America, Cuba, and Brazil. Sorry, I have to miss Olga's presentation, but if you don't mind sending me your PPT, I'd love to follow up. So I will perhaps just share my research on the BRI, and if I don't have time to take questions from the audience and everyone, including panelists, feel free to reach out. So a lot of the talk today is based on this book Juvaria mentioned in the introduction, so the Belt Road Beyond in China, 1998 to 2018. Right? The reason is BRI, of course, was proposed in later 2013 and started to formulate its policy scopes and directions, priorities after 2014, right? But the kinds of political economic structure, the political economic forces and the dynamics that shape the BRI are exactly the same kind of forces in China that have driven China's earlier national strategy, the Western development programs, and the China Goes Global. So this book goes back in 20 years and unpacking the political economic forces. And I think as we are looking at the rise of the China as a new power, it is really important to see like the domestic institutions and the structure and the undercurrents, actors, processes that shape this new power. I think that my remark really kind of fits today's theme, right? The international system. In this international system, we had one dominant discourses of great power and grand strategy, but now we are looking at another one. And I'm not saying that the Chinese BRI is representing the Chinese style grand strategy that's particularly unique, but I think it's very different from the common literature on grand strategy. So I still look at China's BRI as China's rising strategy, the grand strategy, but it's forces I believe are more driven by domestic political economy. And how it's going, where it's going, with what kind of outcome, that's really shaped by process. So my ways of looking at grand strategy is really similar to some of the more refined studies of grand strategy rather than the more simplistic understanding of grand strategy as this doctrine versus the other defense report. It's not like that. Right? So if we use that simplistic view of grand strategy, then although China has a Chinese word, 大战略, right, grand strategy in describing the BRI, but BRI is not that kind of doctrine. So for that, I want to unpack to you guys today. One is the political economic forces, and two is a process so far. So in terms of political economy structure, driving the BRI, and that's the same political economic structure that drive all development, foreign policy, major issues in China. That is what I called fragmented state system, right? So the Chinese state is not just one actor or one agency. It's really 3 blocks of actors. And the first block is the party leadership. It sits at the top, but the scope and the oversight is relatively limited. So the role it plays is really through the political leadership's rhetoric and in promotion, in campaigning, and using the party organization for information and for mobilization, right? But in terms of policy, programs, financing, these big decisions are made by the Chinese state agency as a state bureaucracy, or it's called the state council, led by the premier, Premier Li Keqiang, and then a dozens or so of ministries, including the foreign exchange regulators and the People's Bank of China. Right? And so they make big policy, often very vague, overseeing foreign investments, BRI, the parameters and the processes. But in my study, I think, again, this is quite unique and prevalent feature of China, but perhaps the least understood of China externally. That is, the Chinese supranational governments actually have enormous independent resources and power, and that China is not a federal state, but the local governments actually have its independent resources and independent power of interpreting domestic and international foreign policy, and they often collaborate with national planners and the state-owned companies, including banks, to come up with project programs. So if we look at the BRI, how it's being implemented and who are the actors in a certain point of view, you see, look at how the projects are led, interpreted, promoted by the coalition of state-owned companies, local governments, as well as private business. So this is one. So once we follow this structure, and then because for grand strategy in China, one thing is it will stay, right? It's the main goal is clear. It's vague, but it's clear. That is, it's helping China achieve its international goals. The priority is really to seek a relatively stable external environment for domestic development. So all China's strategy, the biggest strategy is to secure a relatively stable external environment for domestic development. So BRI is one such strategy. So I also call it's a globalizing strategy from China. And then in different periods, the goals will be different, right? So the kinds of policy and project that prominent in that process will be also different. So the first stage, I call it BRI 1.0, is really from 2014 to 2016. And if we look at this period, we saw a lot of pledges, remarks, rhetoric, and noisy information coming from Beijing, right? And so it's what I call very ambiguous and ambitious period of BRI, and it kind of giving a lot of incentives for mobilization. And so the goal it was to mobilize participation of local governments and market actors in the BRI, and the process was really top-down mobilization with with the leadership's messaging and mass participation from Chinese local actors. And the outcome, of course, my book really focuses on that point, is different localities came up with different projects in China and outside China. And in this period, most of projects were in China. And that kind of very ambitious rhetoric, and yet relatively pragmatic and self-interested interpretation and implementation by Chinese commercial actors had lots of costs, right? So BRI 1.5 was really featured by a lot of external backlash. For example, the debt trap framing becoming dominant in external description of China, and the weaponization of BRI projects also became very popular framing, pointing out the strategic and military implications of the BRI. And development scholars criticize BRI's environmental and social negative outcomes. And then the reputation cost to China was really grave. On the other hand, there were financial risk on the China side as well. So in response to this feedback, in 2019, when the BRI was holding its second summit in Beijing, they actively, so these think tanks, agencies in Beijing actively incorporated these external critics and the backlash and came up with, from the messaging level to agency level, a much more moderate BRI version, so the BRI 2.0. And for example, the main message changed from project of the century to just a high quality sustainable development. And the documents publicized in the 2019 summit were all trying to address the financial environmental criticism of BRI. Then COVID happened, right? So early 2020, and when COVID happened, that's a real challenge to the BRI trajectory. Number one was external opinions of China really deteriorated significantly. Number two is the host countries, right? The BRI needs financial sharing from the host governments as well. But most of the BRI partners experienced financial troubles, and so that's not going to be sustainable. And externally, the linkages between China and outside world, just the fact of pandemic, was largely severed, right? But then when we look at domestic interests and ideas for BRI, that's continuing because number one, as I said, China's strategic geopolitical goals of the BRI still was there, and the diplomatic needs of making relationship with outside world, that still is there, and economic needs. So the Chinese own interest motivation are still there. So that's how it's continuing. But the fact, as I mentioned, COVID did bring significant change on all levels. And so what the Chinese adapted was to emphasizing different aspects of BRI. So there's a big physical infrastructure, large-scale infrastructure, ports, railways are no longer as feasible. And then they try to restructure those into smaller connectivity related projects, as well as more digital related trade and investment. And the second part was the heavily robust strengthened health BRI. So before 2020, the Chinese health BRI was in name, right? It was just a hollow conference. But then after the COVID, the health BRI involved local governments and the health business communities as well. And so, lastly, the recent trends was in facing this very significant intensified showdown of superpowers, right? So now we can say we're officially entering a period of superpower showdown between China and US-led number of countries. I think the BRI is being re-emphasized on two directions. One is to work more with multilateral institutions and arrangements, both at the global level and a regional level. And so instead of this bilateral project, I don't know whether this will succeed, but that's the message from China, multilateral strengthening. And two is treating BRI a kind of extension of South-to-South, a development-oriented project. So China said it doesn't want to be the leader of development or the developing world, but they want to be a leading advisor to the developing countries. So anti-poverty and China's the reform mechanism, the Chinese way of digital development, and those issues will be promoted more externally. So with that, I will stop.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. And once again, I invite people for the Q&A, but I've got a couple of questions for you. I was really interested in your concept of the fragmented state system. And secondly, about your kind of timelines and the responses of Chinese elite decision makers to external criticism. So the fragmented state system view is very different from the one which is projected of a kind of monolithic, dictatorship in effect, of an autocracy, which, does all those bad things that we hear about as well. So would you say, does this approximate a kind of a tiered system in a broadly unified by ideology and by a kind of common vision? So these are three layers of something which is quite unified, or are these competitive with each other as well? The second thing is the image of China projected usually is one which doesn't listen to outside opinion. It is basically on the march. It has declared ambition and it's going to do what it wants to do. Yet what you've painted the picture here is a China which looks a little less confident than which is painted. So, President Xi's kind of great ambitious China dream and so on. But you're painting a picture of a Chinese elite, which, if you like, is listening to what is going on outside and calibrating and adjusting, and maybe even a bit defensive about projecting its power. So just those two, please, if possible.
Oh, these are very rich questions. Just to make quick comments. One is what I say about policy fragmentation in China is a very tested and proven phenomena in comparative political economy, but it's less known at the international relations, the general. So there is actually a rather significant gap between studies of policy development in China at the so the academic field difference is very grave. Second is I actually have just published a journal of special issues in the Journal of East Asian Studies, a special issue on China's capital goes global. So we have 3 articles unpacking the domestic institutions and fragmentation, and that actually makes the so-called top-down cohesive narrative very, very incomplete. So I would highly recommend that piece. In the journal, then have two really primary research on external cases. So one in Zambia, a developing democracy, and one in Australia, a developed democracy, right? So it's the Chinese way when they are operating abroad. And so even the outcome was similar, but it's the misperception and the political backlash are there. So we kind of map out the causal mechanism as well. So I guess I'll just say the in this article, in one of the article for the JES, I explained the institutional structure, right? So the institutional structure, why fragmentation can never be resolved in China, and I will use that one as addressing your comments, and then the cohesive side, right? So policy is fragmented, but on general, the Chinese does have among the elites across the board, they do have these general cohesive ideas. And so in the book, I explained 3 layers of ideas that largely the Chinese elites, including the politicians, think tank scholars, professionals, and then local government agencies and big educated entrepreneurs. So among these broader elites in China, there are 3-layered cohesive thinking, right? One is nationalism, but nationalism is really about the strengthening, modernization, and rise of China. So no one elite dispute that China's goal is for itself to become as strong, as powerful globally. The second is growth. They still think economic development, the accumulation of national wealth will be core to achieving this nationalist goal. And then the third layer is at operational level. So you look at the professionals, business people, local governments, they believe market mechanism, although we kind of disagree what are the market mechanism, but the Chinese, they believe market mechanism, not the public ownership per se, but market mechanism, competition, efficiency, technology, research development, those are the most effective means to achieving the growth, right? And so with that very broader cohesion, and then at the policy level, they debate, they make changes, they adapt, and that's just how the system interact with changing circumstances itself and with changing circumstances abroad. I know there might be some other questions, but I will have to sign off to go to my other call. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of different questions that people would like to ask, but I understand the position that we're all in these days. But thank you so much for making the time. Bye-bye. Okay, great. Now, last but not least, Olga's been very kind, very patient and generous. You have the last words in our webinar today. Olga.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing some ideas and partial results of an ongoing research we are conducting at our center right now. But I wanted to apologize first for the technical problems we have had here. As I'm sure you know, Zoom is not available for Cubans, so we have to use a VPN in order to join the meeting, and it is always complex and makes things more complex than usual. Second, I haven't spoken English in a while, so I want to apologize if I make any mistake in my presentation. So I'm going to share the presentation because I have some maps and some data I want you to see. Let me see if this works properly. Okay. Share. Oh my God. Do you see it now? Do you see the presentation?
No, we don't.
Oh my God. Raul, could you please call that boy? My
Olga,
goodness.
if you can just, if you can email it to me, I can run it for you.
Let me see if I did it properly. Well, anyways, I will start talking because I don't want to waste more time. Oh God, I think we lost the connection. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, well, apparently we are not going to be able, and now you see it?
Something is happening, but it's a blank thing, but it does look like it's starting. But it's completely without content and yeah, we may have to go to plan B, which is just tell us what you want to say. Olga, you've frozen. Olga? I think maybe Olga's had to leave and then try to get back in. See, Filipe, I wanted to ask you a question, another question, which I didn't have time for while we're waiting for Olga to navigate the tech. Just in terms of Lula and UNISOR, and why not ALBA?
Yeah, why not ALBA? That's a great question as well. ALBA, Lula is a huge, he likes the idea of ALBA, but I think there is a regional tension as well between what Brazil represents in South America and Venezuela represents in South America. So there is a competition inside the region as well. So this might explain why Lula tried to a new project, which was UNASUR. UNASUR was conceived as a huge project of regional integration. Of course, it had its economic phase, but Mercosur is also has an economic phase. But UNASUR was thinking further. It had a security dimension. It had a cultural dimension. But when that pink tide ended, as I was trying to show you guys, UNASUR was dead. So Bolsonaro last year he left the UNASUR, and with other countries, with right governments, they founded a new project which is called ProSur. So they tried to change UNASUR to ProSur, and ProSur is something that it doesn't exist like UNASUR existed, but it's an alliance of far-right governments. It didn't work as Bolsonaro intended, but it's running, it's going on right now. Brazil is part of ProSur initiative. So I think the answer is that there is something to do with the regional tensions between Brazil, Venezuela, But that doesn't mean that Lula was against Alba.
Right.
That doesn't mean at all.
Hmm.
But Alba, Brazil wouldn't be maybe the major force as Brazil was in UNASUR. So I think Raul could maybe he has a sharp view about it, a better view about it than me, but that's the way I see things.
And I wonder, Raul, if you talked about the civil, you're muted, civil society linkages within ALBA.
Well, the question also we see from Brazil, it's another thing that Brazil has never been part of our America in many ways. Brazil has always been more to the Atlantic. You know, the Amazons have blocked Brazil from the rest of Latin America more than the Atlantic Ocean. But on the other hand, Latin America or the rest of the Americas have always wanted Brazil to come closer. So that's not to detriment of Brazil. So we consider Brazilians as our brothers and sisters, but still that has been is a long idea, running idea in Brazilian politics. Now the question of ALBA, as I said earlier, the novelty in this sense, or the attempts, is that it goes beyond a mere market integration of markets or mobility of people. For example, ALBA has no mobility treatment of workforce mobility, because the market is not disregarded, but it's not the most important aspect. It has to do with that ALBA has a bank, for example. It's called the Bank of ALBA, which is, and also they even attempted to create a monetary system, which is not, for economic reasons, did not work. It was called Sucre. It was a unique system of regional compensation, which was originally entitled or organized in a way that countries could conduct trade among themselves without having to go through the international financial system on the US dollar. But that, for practical reasons, and I'm not an economist, but that didn't work, and that was basically postponed for some time, and I don't think it's going back anytime soon. So the major achievements I see with ALBA is more on the social integration, on for example educational exchanges, and civil society exchanges, and now what I mentioned earlier of this idea of bringing together think tanks to try to generate an alternative view on how to theoretically support that idea of having an alternative regionalism. Filipe mentioned the ProSur, but also you have to remember that there was also the Pacific Alliance, not the one that includes China and the one that was called the one that Trump dropped out. There was a Pacific Alliance that would include Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico then, before López Obrador. So for some time, Latin America was mostly divided in this East and West. Now we are at a point in which you see that I would not call what the so-called pink tide, but there may be a shift to more center-left governments in Latin America, which would in some ways help build or at least create a less hostile environment from the United States and to some extent, not to the same, but to some extent Canada, to alternative counter-hegemonic projects that would present a challenge to US hegemony, which has been built over more than 200 years, almost 200 years. So that's basically the importance I see with ALBA. Unfortunately, in my view, it didn't go as far as because to some extent, as I said earlier, it was weakened when the countries like Ecuador, for example, the Ecuador was a host of UNASUR. UNASUR was in the city of Quito. I mean, so the country that, but now the same thing happens with the so-called Lima group. That is not the government of Peru now doesn't want that to be in Lima. There's no, so the political pendulum in Latin America has shifted in the last decade to more center right or right, ultra right governments, and that may start to change. Well, probably this weekend in Chile, maybe there are elections in Chile, and then next year in, I think, April is Colombia, and October Brazil. Honduras also has elections. So there may be in some ways a shift toward more center, certain left countries which favor a less confrontational and less right-wing nationalism in Latin America, and help all these kinds of projects in that sense.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm wondering, Raul, if you could let Olga use your computer.
Well, I'm using my mobile phone.
Oh, I see. Oh,
and I'm letting her using both computers to see what's going on, and I could just let her use my mobile phone so she can at least speak.
That might be actually the best option at the moment.
Yes, okay, I think she's back.
Hallelujah.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I apologize.
That's all right.
We usually have these kind of problems. Whenever we use Zoom, we have this problem. I don't know how much you heard from what I was saying, but as
maybe just start.
Do you hear me? Do you see the presentation?
Yeah, start. No, we can't. Forget the presentation. But I don't think it's going to happen. If you could just give us a.
Forget about the presentation, and yes, obviously I won't be able to use it. But as I was saying, my premise is that in their struggle to gain the hearts and minds of the Latin American people, both the United States and China are using the Latin American media, and not any media, but the most influential media in the region. And the difference is that the United States has had an advantage the Chinese don't have. That is the historical ties the private media system of the United States has had with the private media system in Latin America. Remember that the Latin American, at least the television, began in a private system with a private property and not with public property. So what I'm going to do now is first, oh my God. First, I will present some data regarding some research we have had about the links between the US and the Latin American media. Then I will show what the Chinese government, specifically the government, has been doing, and a private corporation that has funding from the Chinese government. And then I will offer my final conclusions. So to begin with an example of the relationship between the US and the Latin American media. We conducted a research during the Obama administration in which we chose two countries, that is Colombia and Venezuela, completely different antagonistic governments in their visions and in ideological terms. Obviously, the government of Chavez, Maduro, and then the government of Santos, and now Duque. And what we did was we chose the most important or the most influential satellite media system in the region, that is DirecTV. At the time, there was DirecTV, Dish, and Sky in Brazil. So we took DirecTV Latin America in order to see what they were offering to the Latin American people. And in Colombia and in Venezuela, we took all the programs. We saw the origin of those programs. We saw the origin of those programs. And then we made different codifications, and we said global channels, regional channels, and local channels. And the final result was that, so you're seeing, you are listening and seeing me. Okay, so I move here. So I don't know if you're seeing anything, but I was right here. And this is DirecTV group that is the most influential direct to home or satellite television in the region. the most influential one during the Obama administration in Latin America. Now it is called Brio Corp and had an agreement with AT&T from the United States. But as you see in the map, it covers all the Latin American regions. So as part of our study, we chose Colombia and Venezuela. So we codified all the programs that were provided to the Latin American people in Colombia and Venezuela. This is what we found in Venezuela. And as you see, the origin of the largest amount of programs came from what we define as global. And by global, we meant the United States, and in the case of Europe, PRISA Corporation or PRISA Group, that is the most influential one in the region, that is Spanish. There was no Chinese program at the time in DirecTV Colombia. But when we did our study in Venezuela, you see the same pattern. And this is interesting because this was during the Chavez and Maduro administration, and they had a different communication policy. They even passed a new communication law in Venezuela in order to improve the offer of different TV channels for the Venezuelan people. But the pattern was quite similar to the one in Colombia. So when you see differences, there were basically no differences in what the Colombian and Venezuela people were receiving from the largest satellite television provider in the region at the time, that is DirecTV Latin America. In addition to this, we did also a study on the way in which the military presence was covered by the media in Colombia, for instance. And this is interesting because it's not only a positive view of the United States in the television, but also in the printed media. When we did a qualitative analysis, content analysis of what was being published by La Tribuna in Colombia, we noticed not only that they favor the American military presence in Colombia, but the largest amount of sources they use were American military officers present in Colombia, as well as American official sources. Not so much Colombia or civilian or members of the civil society in Colombia, not to mention that the voices that were silenced were those of the people that were against the military American presence in Colombia. So what we are seeing now is that the United States has long ties with the television and the printed media, at least in a couple of countries in Latin America. But in addition to that, they are using, the US is using a federal agency, that is the US Agency for Global Media. It was the Broadcasting Board of Governors until 2018. They changed the name to make it more marketable. That's what I think. It's not, gives no idea what the government is behind this. And in order to strengthen their influence in Latin America, they are using Voice of America, but not only Voice of America as an option for the Latin American people. They are making agreements with the most influential TV channels and radio channels in Latin America. So when you take a look at the affiliates they have in the region, you see a huge amount of private TV and radio stations in Latin America. And when you take a look, I don't know if you're seeing the map, but when you take a look at the places, you are seeing Central America, you are seeing Venezuela, you are seeing Ecuador, you are seeing Colombia, you are seeing Bolivia, you are seeing Uruguay, Chile. And when you take a look at the policy of what had happened inside those countries, you are seeing that they are priorities of the US government in Latin America. So they are offering also programs that are being made by the US government in order to gain the minds and hearts of the Latin American people. And they are using the most influential media in the region. So when you take a look at these affiliates they have in the region, you see TV Azteca, for instance, in Mexico, very influential. You see Cable Noticias in Venezuela, that is the most influential cable television channel in Venezuela, but you see El Nacional, also you see La Patilla. These are the most influential, I would say, Latin American corporations, and they are the clients of Voice of America in Latin America. Now, what is China doing? China began first with an approach that I would say was intelligent and interesting. First, it reached governments that welcomed them in the region. I'm talking about Venezuela, I'm talking about Bolivia. And what they did first was to help finance and launch communication satellites in these countries, that is Venezuela and Bolivia, in order to increase the capacity of these countries to reach their own audience. And they also established or offered Spanish content, Spanish language content, Spanish language Chinese content, I'm sorry, in order to reach these audiences, at least in these two countries. Then they expand to reach Chinese media into Latin America. They also began to fund travels of Latin American journalists, influential Latin American journalists, to China, so that they would get familiar with the Chinese culture. And in this, the Confucius Institutes play a great role, but the Latin American media in general. And apart from this, what they have done lately is sign agreements between the China Media Group, that is a corporation that receives funds from the Chinese government, and the Latin American partners of what is known as Latin American Information Alliances. And this alliance is, according to its founders, the biggest non-profit television network alliance in Latin America. They include 22 television networks of the region, which is very interesting, because when you see who they are, you will see that they are quite similar. You will see names here that are the ones that are making agreements with Voice of America at the same time. So you have TV Azteca, you have Artear, you have in Venezuela, have people in Puerto Rico. So these are very influential television networks in Latin America. So why are they doing this? And they are also signing agreements between CCTV Video News Agency of China and the mainstream media of 21 countries in the region, with the purpose of, I would say, improve the image of the Chinese government in the region. Paying too much attention to television in particular in the region. First, because according to the Latin American people, according to some research, Latin American people still uses more television than social media, although we have to admit that during the COVID period, the last 2 years, the use of social media increased in Latin America, but it increased mainly in the millennials and the younger people. The older people and those who are more interested in politics get their information from television. So they are investing in television because they can reach more to the Latin American people, according to the latest report of Latino Barometro, which is a corporation that conducts studies in all over Latin America. So as I said, you see here television and internet, and they are quite similar in the use people make of these two media, but still Latin American people get their news from television, radio, which is very influential in Latin America. We have, according to the latest report by UNESCO, we have more than 10,000 radio stations, rural radio stations, which is very interesting. So this had led me to get these conclusions. First, both countries are acting based, obviously, on their foreign policy objectives, and they are using the necessary means to achieve those objectives in the region. They have made, both of them, a global, regional, national, an evaluation of the global, regional, national, and local tendencies and have defined their strategy based on these scenarios. If people are getting the news from television, I'm going to invest on television. If people are getting their news on social media, I'm providing the possibility for the people to use social media. They are adjusting their resources and capabilities to their own priorities. Obviously, if you're going to make an investment, you're going to adjust your priorities. They are both implementing, and this is interesting, the necessary legal actions to sign agreements with private media and affiliates in the region to reach the Latin American audience. If they need to establish a transmitter in order to get their content to the people, they would negotiate the license with the governments in order to achieve their goal. And that takes a lot of paperwork, as I'm sure you know. Both countries are using their specialized resources, and by resources, I mean human and technical resources. The Chinese government, for instance, are using Chinese journalists who can speak Spanish properly, and they are producing soap operas in Spanish for the Latin American people, but they have to compete with Brazil, that is the largest producer of soap operas in the region, as well as Colombia and Televisa. So they have a competition, but they are putting money in soap operas, and they are reaching certain, I would say, audience in Latin America. The United States has favored their ties with the private media, whereas China first began their agreements with governments in particular, and then went to the private media or to the private sector. And and a final conclusion for me is that obviously China is facing, I would say, more challenges than the United States. And among those challenges, we have confidence in the audience. I mean, people in Latin America trust the American media and the American products, whether we like it or not. I mean, at least in Cuba, whether we like it or not in Cuba. And they also have a huge challenge that is a cultural challenge they face. With this is Western culture. China is, for some people, too far away. They're very different from us, and people do not feel too much identified with the products of with Chinese products, despite the effort that is being made by the. And another challenge, I would say, is that they have another Asian competitor in the region, that is Korea. K-pop is very popular in Latin America, as well as the Korean soap operas. So when you take a look at what China is doing and what Korea is doing, they have also to compete not only with the United States, but they have to compete with the Korean products, and they have to compete also with regional channels like Telesur, for instance. So I would leave it here. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, if I know the answer, of course.
Great. Thank you so much, Olga. That's so interesting. And thanks for persevering when lesser people would have given up with all the technical issues. But that's fantastic. It's such an interesting piece of research. And it suggests that China's soft power strategy is actually quite well developed, even
Yes.
though it has challenges, and that it's multi-institutional. So you've got the Confucius Institutes, and obviously you're talking about the media, and I assume at the level of the universities and relationships there too. I wonder how, on the other hand, in terms of audience attraction and size relative US and China, as in what size of audiences would you say are actually attracted to Chinese produced television programs? And
I don't have a particular number, but I would say it's a tiny population. There was a research published by an English professor in which he conducted focus groups in order to see how people welcomed the Chinese products. And it was very interesting because some people didn't even know that they have a Chinese offer in the region. So it's difficult, I would say it's tiny if you were to compare that consumption with the American products.
So in terms of influence, then you would agree, you would argue that it's incomparable. They're
making a huge effort, but it will take time for them to gain the mind and hearts of the Latin American people. And if you add to that the fact that they are investing and they are very aggressive in their investments in the region, and sometimes, for instance, a topic such as the environment, which is very complex for the Chinese investments in the region, is also a handicap they have to deal with.
Right. And when you look at the media, do you distinguish between news media and kind of entertainment and kind of non-news?
Yes. In the case of the United States, they have influenced both in entertainment and news media. The most influential, I would say, apart from the local newscast in the region, for instance, CNN in Espanol, CNN in Spanish is very influential in the region, despite the efforts, for instance, of Telesur, which is very consumed in Cuba and Venezuela, but CNN in Espanol is still a leading, I would say, media in informational terms, news terms. In entertainment, we still have a huge dependency in the region on the American companies. When you take a look at how we are receiving in Latin America, when you take a look at the films we are consuming in Latin America, more than 95% of them come from the United States. If you take a look at all the data that has been released by the different governments and countries, for instance, in Venezuela, they consume much more American movies than their own Venezuelan movies. And that is something the government is paying attention to. In Cuba, even in Cuba, despite the fact that we have a very good, we have the fundings to produce our own cinema, we consume more than 90% of what we see in our television that is public comes from the United States.
So does this
both in entertainment?
That's interesting. I didn't know that. And so clearly there are kind of complexities so that you could watch a lot of American TV. I do as well, news and entertainment and so on, but be relatively unaffected in one's attitude towards the United States. So that is to say, you know, you can eat as many burgers as you want, and you might love
but you
them.
have to take into account there the history of the conflict Cuba and the United States have had. So we consume a lot of American products, but we are also aware of the complex relationship we have had with them. So there is a mediation that has to do with politics and the, I would say, patriotic culture of the Cuban people.
Sure. But it does complexify this idea that a lot of people are anti-American, that if they oppose American foreign policy or American, you know, kind of interventions, American military power and so on, that actually you can enjoy American culture very liberally. You can also be, you know, that doesn't make you necessarily pro-American. It just means you oppose American foreign policies.
Yeah, and that's a challenge we're facing right now in Cuba. You have to consider that we have more than 2 million Cubans living in the United States. So there is a tendency, and this is a very private and personal criteria. There is, for me, there is a part of the Cuban population that is very, I would say, pro-American right now.
Right. Well, as usual, we have gone over our time, but I mean, I'm really pleased that you're all able to make your presentations, and we couldn't ask as many questions as we would have wanted, but I would like to say thank you so much to Olga for persevering and being determined and getting your presentation out, to Filipe, to Minyi, who had to leave us a bit early, and to Raul. Absolutely fantastic, highly informative, and I think we still have hundreds of questions which will still interest us, so that we will continue with this kind of examination, and I hope in different forums as well. So I want to say thank you so much. We have the pleasure today of having two of our partner groups, one in Havana University, the other in Brazil, having set up this panel and really kind of shown that the partnership is good, strong and useful and interesting. And I'm really pleased about that. And I want to thank Juvaria for all the work that she always does to make these things successful. And Elliot, who does a huge amount as well in the background. So, and our audience, which has very heartily hung on till into the Friday evening, which it is in London at the moment. So thank you so much, everyone. Next week, we're going to talk about the transnational right and the rise of the transnational right in world politics. So please join us again next Friday at the same time. And there'll be posters and tweets and stuff like that about that. But in the meantime, enjoy your week and see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.